is Chautauqua Institution's 10th annual Robert H. Jackson Lecture on the Supreme Court, and it is one of our most widely known lectures in legal, judicial, and academic circles. This lecture is presented in collaboration with the Robert H. Jackson Center, located in Jamestown.
It's always a great pleasure to be back here. I'm pleased to welcome you to, as Jeff said, the 10th Chautauqua Institution Robert H. Jackson Lecture on the Supreme Court of the United States. What this lecture does, collaboration between Chautauqua and the Jackson Center, is brings to you a high pinnacle at the moment of the Chautauqua season, shortly after the end of the Supreme Court term, a leading analyst, commentator, expert on the work of the Supreme Court of the United States. Previous Jackson lecturers have included lawyers, scholars, and journalists to consider the Supreme Court at the level that, frankly, it and Chautauqua and you deserve. The lecture is named in memory of Justice Robert H. Jackson, who lived from 1892 until 1954. Jackson began his career in private practice. After 20 years, his activities as a Democrat and his friendship with Franklin Roosevelt led him to public service. And in his public years, he was 5 times appointed by President Roosevelt and confirmed by the United States Senate to high national government offices. General Counsel of the Bureau of Internal Revenue, Assistant Attorney General of the United States, Solicitor General of the United States, Attorney General of the United States, and then in 1941, Supreme Court Justice. He also, in addition to all of that domestic work, spent a year AWOL, 1945-1946, by appointment of President Truman as the chief U.S. prosecutor of the Axis war criminals in the European theater, the Nuremberg trial. Justice Jackson is generally regarded as the greatest writer ever to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, if you're a partisan of Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., I'd like to see your evidence. If you're a partisan of Chief Justice John Roberts, or Justice Antonin Scalia, or Justice Elena Kagan, you may well have a powerful case, but you have a work in progress. Jackson was a model of smart, independent judging, well explained. He was a case-at-a-time judge, not a great ideological, pre-committed judge. And thus, his liberal friends believed he was too conservative, his conservative friends thought he was too liberal, New Dealers deplored his friendship with Herbert Hoover, and Republicans, etc., deplored his roots in the Roosevelt administration, which is a nice central place to be in life and in legacy. Jackson was a product, as you'll hear, of no fancy law school. And more than that, he was a product of no college at all. After birth in Spring Creek in Warren County, Pennsylvania, and a family move above the New York state line to Frewsburg, and modest public schooling there, and an additional year at the Jamestown High School, he largely apprenticed his path to the law, becoming a lawyer at age 21. His higher education was his lifelong learning, and a big part of it was Chautauqua Institution, a place he began attending as a Jamestown and Frewsburg boy, hearing William Jennings Bryan, for example, speak here when Jackson was just a teenager. Jackson began to be a Chautauqua speaker himself when he was a young adult, and that continued across his lifetime. He was also an inside advisor to the leadership of Chautauqua Institution, a regular attendee, a devoted student and fan and supporter of this place. Indeed, when Jackson died at the early age of 62 in 1954, his 8 surviving colleagues brought him home, and after the funeral in Jamestown and the burial in Frewsburg, they insisted on seeing the place that they had heard about so much from their colleague Robert Jackson. Now, it was October, sun dappled, turning leaves, deserted, but those 8 justices, the other 8 of Brown versus Board of Education, came here because Bob Jackson was Chautauqua and they needed to see what this was all about. Now, we continue that high standard, what Jackson was and what Jackson embodies in history, with the past speakers in this series and with today's speaker. Professor Akhil Amar, born in Michigan, raised in California, is really a product of Yale. He attended Yale University, he attended the Yale Law School, he strayed for a year to Boston to be a law clerk to then Judge Stephen Breyer of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit, and then in 1985 he joined the Yale Law School faculty. Akhil is both a law professor and a political science professor, and his rank, his chair, is Sterling Professor at Yale, one of the most distinguished university-wide honors conferred not only there, but in academia, anywhere, anytime. He's a leading teacher, a leading scholar, and a leading public voice on the Constitution, its history, and its meaning. He's a great author. His books include The Constitution and Criminal Procedure, The Bill of Rights, Creation and Reconstruction, America's Constitution, a Biography, and America's Unwritten Constitution. And following this program, he will be available to sign books at the Hall of Missions. Akhil Amar is the latest piece in a braid that connects, a thick braid of connection, Robert H. Jackson, Yale University, and Chautauqua Institution. Let me spell out briefly what I mean. Well, first, Jackson in his life, and particularly in his public life, the 30s, 40s, and 50s, was a man of many close friendships and relationships with people at Yale, particularly the law school. This included the dean of the law school, Charles Clark, who later became a judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. It included a law professor, Thurman Arnold, a leading national author. His book, The Folklore of American Capitalism, was America's book in 1937 and 1938. And when Jackson was promoted from Assistant Attorney General to Solicitor General, he recruited his friend Thurman Arnold, the law professor, from Yale to Washington to become the Assistant Attorney General heading the Antitrust Division. Those of you who are lawyers and Washingtonians perhaps recognize the name Thurman Arnold because his career went from DOJ to the DC Circuit. Being a judge bored him out of his mind, and so he left the court after just a few years and was one of the co-founders of the great then and now national law firm Arnold, Fortas, and Porter, today Arnold and Porter. A second connection, Robert Jackson spoke at Yale all the time. One particularly notable occasion was in 1938 when the students of the Yale Law Journal invited Jackson to speak at their annual banquet. And he gave a very witty, eloquent, classically Jacksonian speech that in the end had a serious message for those liberals and conservatives, which was to embrace the issues of their time, to write about things that mattered, to debate until they were exhausted, and to, of course, do well with their lives, but to do good with their lives by pursuing public service. But a third part of the braid, a very direct one, wraps Chautauqua in too. Robert Jackson, man of no college education, had two children. And they, of course, were raised in different circumstances than he'd been raised. Jackson's son, William, after his graduation from St. Albans in 1937, became a Yale College student. Yale class of 1941. Bill Jackson ran the political union. He was the vice chairman of the Yale Daily News. He was skull and bones, etc. at Yale. A really big man on campus. But he was also a big man in Chautauqua. You see, in the summer of 1940, summer job, college student William E. Jackson, who later went on to run Milbank Tweed, one of the Earth's great major law firms, ran the Chautauquan Daily. He was a student journalist at Yale, and he brought here the Yale Daily News kind of engagement. And the summer of 1940 was a time when there were big things to engage on. It frankly included a little bit of Supreme Court and a little bit of domestic, but a lot of international. And it lit this place on fire. The Daily was a topic of great controversy. And I direct you to the archives and you can read issues and letters and so forth. But what you'll see is Bill Jackson embracing the Chautauqua ethic, that of course was his father's education and upbringing, and bringing to it the Yale ethic of learning and engagement and brilliance and debate, and plugging it into the challenges of that time. The debate, including literally between Bill Jackson and his roommate, Kingman Brewster, who headed the America First students, was about isolationism or international involvement. And Bill Jackson's editorial writing on a daily basis argued involvement here to an audience that wasn't entirely in agreement. That kind of scintillating journalism, study, debate on issues of the day was Bill Jackson, and was his father, and was in the Chautauqua institution, and is, I believe, the Robert H. Jackson Lecturer on the Supreme Court of the United States. And I know that it is Akhil Amar. I'm delighted to welcome him tonight.